is going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Sasquatch Out of the Shadows Live. I'm your host, as always, Alex Pedikov. Hope everyone is doing well. We have some cool new banners and stuff like that, so you'll see that going throughout the show. But welcome, everybody, and this is going to be a really fun show tonight. I'm really excited to talk with our guests, but a couple of announcements. We had an awesome show last week talking with Matt Pruitt of the NAWAC. If you want to go check that out, there's a link in the to kind of a playlist in the on the channel, so you can go check that out. Great conversation with Matt. We will be kind of continuing talking about the NAWAC today with our guests, so I'll be talking about that in a couple of minutes here. Should be great. But this coming Wednesday night at 8 p.m., there's a special show that's going to be going live, even though it's pre-recorded. It's with Gareth Patterson, and we're talking about basically the South African Bigfoot. I talked with Gareth yesterday on Sunday, had an amazing almost 2-hour conversation, probably one of my favorite interviews I've done so far. It was just fascinating talking about these Bigfoot-like creatures known as the otang that Gareth has been studying and been taking reports of down in South Africa. Now, he is somebody that's not really a Bigfoot researcher. He is somebody who's worked with lions as well as elephants for most of his career. It's been really interesting working with other animals, and kind of while studying a group of secret elephants in a forested region of South Africa, came across encounters with strange creatures that the locals called the otang, and has since kind of written about it and talked about it. Super fascinating. So it wasn't live. I did make some posts, and I had a bunch of audience questions that you guys submitted. So thank you for those. They're in there. So if you want to watch through, that'll be coming out on Wednesday night at 8 p.m. It'll be going live, but there will be a little banner that says it's pre-recorded. So it's going to be the same kind of format. And as I said, it will be technically a live stream, but it's going to be pre-recorded. We weren't able to do it live because of internet issues on Gareth's end. South Africa has a lot of kind of power issues, and he just didn't want us to be in the middle of the stream and suddenly it goes dark and he's not able to get online for the rest of the day. So totally understandable, but an interview I really wanted to do for quite a while. So be looking forward to that. Next Monday show will be hosted by Carrick St. Laurent, great friend of the program. Obviously has guest hosted quite a few streams when I'm not able to come in. I don't know what topic he's going to do, but Carrick always does an awesome job putting the shows together. I'm excited to see that show in retrospect. I will be on the road. I will be out in Kentucky, actually, at CryptidCon, which I'm really excited. So if anybody that's coming, that's in the audience that's coming out to CryptidCon, definitely come out, hang out. I'm going to have a table. Let's talk Bigfoot and other cryptids. That'll be a lot of fun. I probably will do a live stream one of the days, either Saturday or Sunday. It's supposed to be a crazy busy event. So in a moment where I get some peace, I will probably do a live stream for everybody, just show off some of the cool stuff. And there's gonna be some great speakers, Cliff Barrickman, just so many, I can't even think of them right now. There's just a lot of great people from the kind of community that are gonna be there. So that should be fun. But enough of me talking, let's get on to tonight's show. So tonight's guest, we are actually gonna be talking to Michael Mays. Now, Michael is a really awesome researcher, and I'll kind of read you a little bit about the bio. So Michael was born in the Piney Woods of East Texas and grew up in Big Thicket country, hearing tales of ghost lights, wild men, and black panthers said to haunt the woods in his corner of Southeast Texas. He currently serves as the chairman of the board of directors of the North American Wood Ape Conservancy, NAWAC, as we were talking about. He actively participates in their efforts. He is likely best known for his research on the legendary black panthers believed by many rural residents of Texas and the American South to roam the swamps, marshes, woods, and bottomlands of this country. His book, Shadow Cats, The Black Panthers of North America, thoroughly explores this phenomena and has gathered positive reviews across the board. He's also the author of Patty, A Sasquatch Story, which is a self-published children's book based on the Patterson-Gimlin film. Really cool. Michael has been featured in numerous podcasts and radio programs. He's also appeared on the A&E Network program, The Lowe Files, and has written for San Antonio television station KSAT in the animated Haunted South Texas Folklore feature series. He has basically been exploring myths, folklore, and the legends of Texas and North America on his Texas Cryptid Hunter blog as well. So really excited to talk with Michael. So without further ado, let's just bring Michael right into the program. How you doing, Michael?
Doing great, Alex. How are you?
Good. Thanks so much for coming on.
I appreciate it.
So obviously you're into a lot of things, and that's what I
Mhm.
like. I love talking Bigfoot with people, but you're also into something that is very much something I'm interested in, the mystery big cat phenomena. So folks will be familiar with Lions of the East. People kind of know that I've been doing some of that stuff and have had an interest in that for a while, and you have that as well. But before we kind of dive into that, just get kind of the formalities out of the way. What got you into the weird? Is it just growing up with those stories, or what got you into kind of looking into some of this cryptid stuff?
What got me into the weird is probably genetics more than anything. I don't know, but just I grew up at a time, late '70s into the early '80s, that was kind of I've used the term a golden age for this kind of thing. The
Right.
uh, In search of programs like that were on TV, and I just ate them up. $6 Million Man fought Bigfoot on TV, and that probably sealed the deal for me right there, when that program came on. But just have been interested in not just anything weird, but kind of mysteries of the natural world since I was a little kid. Checked out all the books in the elementary and middle school libraries on those kinds of topics, and just never really outgrew it, I guess. And put it aside for a while after I got married, had a couple of kids, and was trying to make a living. But it wouldn't stay buried very long. So in my early mid-30s, got back into it full bore, and really haven't looked back since.
Right on. Yeah, I mean it's interesting because I often talk to people. It seems that there's those two kind of ways that people get into this sort of stuff. It's either they had an experience or they just had a curiosity from when they were a kid. So I'm very much of the same kind of vein that you got into it for those reasons. So it's cool to meet a fellow lifelong kind of investigator of the weird into all this kind of stuff, and especially the cryptid stuff. But do want to take a second to just say hey to everyone in the chat. We got Kevin Hamilton, what is going on up there in Canada? Scottish Wildman, Christina Bell, Peggy Curtis, how you doing? New Hampshire Sasquatch, what is going on, man? Lots of awesome people in the chat. Great folks. There's probably too many that I can address, but what's up, Bigfoot Anon, Matt Barnes. Hey, Carrick, so cool to see so much NAWAC stuff going on. Hi, all. Yeah, so again, guys, Carrick will be hosting next week's show. Carrick always does a fantastic job. But so let's just dive right into the mystery big cat topic. So I'm not going to make any assumptions, but I'm going to assume that maybe I will make an assumption. I'm assuming down in the area that you're in, as you kind of read in your bio, there's a long history of reports of mountain lions and these kinds of things. And were they ever kind of officially extinct in the area, mountain lions? They were sort of pushed out like they were up here?
It depends on who you talk to. The Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, for example, will say that the only breeding population of mountain lions we have in the state of Texas is way out west in the Big Bend country,
Yep.
Trans-Pecos area. People back east will tell you they've never really completely gone away. They got really rare, but they've never been gone completely. And that's pretty much the same story you'll hear from folks who live in the more rural areas of not just Texas, but the South in general.
Yeah.
They're not common anymore, but the numbers appear to be growing a bit, as the sightings really used to be few and far between as far as just your regular tawny colored mountain
The
lions.
tawny, right?
But they're picking up, and even the wildlife officials have had to admit that the population seems to be spreading back to the east, at least somewhat. And I'm sure that was a begrudging admission on their part for whatever reason, but they did come out and say that population does seem to have expanded at least into the Texas Hill Country, which is, I guess you'd call Central Texas.
Yeah, now that's so interesting. I mean, so many parallels between what is also out here. I mean, we had a mountain lion that was killed in Connecticut in 2011, like an hour outside of New York City, of all places for one to be. And they ran a test on its genetic makeup, and they said it was originally from the Black Hills region of South Dakota. So it's quite a long way for a mountain lion to travel. Now, there's a lot of stories abound, and I've heard stories from down in that area when I was in Fouke. I heard a ton of stories from people talking about panthers. And is that kind of what people refer to them down there? Is just panthers?
Well, it's kind of a semantic thing. Down in my part of the world, down here in Texas and in the American South in general, 99% of the time when the word panther is used, people are talking about a black cat, a
The black
black
cats, yeah.
long-tailed cat. If they use cougar, mountain lion when they're
Right.
talking about the typical
The regular ones, right?
honey-colored cat, right?
Sure.
But I mean, and you can see that in the imagery that's used when the word panther is used. I mean, you don't have to look any farther than the Carolina Panthers football team to,
Right.
in their logo, for example. The one exception that I have found is down in, especially South Florida, the plight of the Florida panther has
Yes,
been
that's right.
pretty well documented. So in that area, they use that term panther when they're talking about the regular colored mountain lion. But pretty much everywhere else, if you hear panther, they're talking about a black animal 99% of the time.
Right. And that is so interesting. You mentioned obviously the Florida panther, which is, from what I understand, very endangered. I mean, there's not a lot of individuals. I think there's been some efforts to bring kind of fresh blood into there, but
Yeah, from
they
Texas.
are yeah, and that's the thing. You guys are sort of sandwiched between the two populations, where you do have the ones in that part of West Texas, obviously getting out to the American Southwest, which is well documented. There's plenty of mountain lions in those areas. And then you have the Florida panthers. Now, those animals are sort of isolated down in Florida, and they are a subspecies kind of Puma concolor, even though they're not really, it's not like they're a separate species. They're just sort of a regional variation. And this is where the debate gets really interesting with the eastern mountain lion. A lot of folks think that the ones that we had up here in the Northeast were a little bit distinct. Maybe they had a different head shape. I heard all kinds of stuff when I was doing my project for a few years, and you've obviously been into this topic, I'd say, a lot longer than I, have been doing it. So that's why I'm curious to talk to you about it, especially. But you hear these stories, and I think that one is one of the really interesting parts, is hearing the people's stories about, oh, I saw it. It was definitely there, or the game camera pictures. I mean, how much does people's, or the stories and the kind of the reliability play into it? Because I've found that a lot of times there's a lot of grand stories, and there's not a lot to show for it, or it ends up being, I get so disappointed in some of these Facebook groups. It's a bobcat. It's like clearly a bob, and it's just kind of like, what is going on?
Yeah, you do have to wade through a lot of that kind of thing. And this is one reason I'm not quite as hard on wildlife officials as some people are.
Yeah.
Simply because, well, I worked for the Texas Park and Wildlife briefly as a summer ranger at one of their state parks, and got a little inside look into some of the hysterical campers that would come in and report this or that. And fact of the matter is, people don't get off the concrete very much anymore, and they really don't know their wildlife. And you're right about these sites and these pictures that circulate. I get at least 2 emails a month, somebody talking about, I took this picture of a mountain lion in my backyard, and it's a bobcat. It's clearly a bobcat. It's not even I mean, there's just no room for doubt at all, but they don't know. They just know that term mountain lion. And so I understand their hesitancy to buy into a lot of the reports, simply because 9 out of 10 times the person, they're not lying, they're just wrong, they're just mistaken,
misidentifying. I mean,
and
that's
you
fine.
do have to wade through a lot of that kind of stuff. The problem with photos is finding the original source of the said photo.
Yeah.
These things will circulate sometimes for years. They tend to pop back up,
It's like in the Bigfoot community, same
yeah,
kind of thing.
it's exactly the same. And there's one specific example I note when I did the book. It was red hot at the time, and so I tracked it down. And a lot of times the photos are legitimate.
Yeah, right.
But it's where they were taken. It's I'll get an email, oh, my cousin got this on his land, or my best buddy's uncle got this, and It was in Central Texas, and I've seen that same photo. I don't know how many times, and the picture is legitimate. It's a black leopard. It was taken on a game preserve in Africa. It's so the picture is legitimate, and um, it can be really frustrating, especially if the person who sent it to you believed whoever gave it to them. They had good faith in that, because you're basically telling them your buddy's a liar, because
Right.
here's here's the link to the news article where this originally
I
was
know.
published. And
Oh
so
man.
that can be a little dicey sometimes, but most of the time, I really believe people are telling the truth. There are times when people are mistaken,
Sure.
and there's a big difference there. So I can really count on one hand the number of times I really felt somebody was trying to put one over on me.
Sure.
But someone being mistaken, that's a pretty common thing.
Yeah, no, that's I mean, I can't even think of the amount of times I've seen the same thing. And I've actually had it happen multiple times, 3, 4 times, where somebody has sent me a photo and said, I got this from a trusted source. This person got this photo of this mountain lion in their orchard or whatever, and they send me the photo, and I've seen it many times before. And you can just do a Google search and it's popped up in other supposed eastern mountain lion sightings, and that's not even getting into the Black Panther kind of thing, which I want to get kind of deep dive a little bit more into, specifically separating that from the tawny mountain lion topic, because I think that they are, while it is sort of a mystery big cat phenomena, especially up here where the mountain lions are definitely not supposed to be, but there's this huge government kind of conspiracy distrust, and we'll get into that. But I do think the Black Panther question is sort of a separate topic, even though it's related. I think it has an overlap, but it's something very strange going on there. I can't quite put my finger on it, but in terms of the public distrust, I've seen so much animosity towards, obviously the federal government. I mean, that should come as no surprise, but state authorities. So whether it be fish and game or game wardens, environmental police, whatever individual states have as their agencies. And I've seen this time and time again. When I did my documentary, I focused on multiple different states here in New England, and kind of their responses were all sort of the same. Yeah, there might be some stragglers moving through. There's definitely no breeding population. And there was almost a systematic denial of when confirmed DNA evidence came in. And I just thought it was very strange. It created a kind of distrust with the public. Now, you mentioned obviously working with kind of the Texas state park system or whatever the organization was, and you kind of got an insight. And I think people are overly hard on them. What do you think is kind of the root of all this? Why do you think there is such a gap between, or a distrust between the public and the authorities, so to speak?
Well, I think we're just, at least in my lifetime, we're distrust for the federal government is at an all-time high, and I don't think it's limited to this topic at all. I think it's just across the board. So I think that's a big part of it.
Right.
I think there's just a lot of people across the country, they don't believe anything that comes out of any government official's mouth these days, regardless of party affiliation or anything else. So I think that's a big part of it. I'm not a big conspiracy theory guy when it comes to this. I think if there's any truth to some sort of organized, might even be too strong a word, denial, it would have to do with the fact that they would have to manage the species, and the dollars are already short, and it's just one more thing on the plate. As a teacher in public schools, I'm used to unfunded mandates from the government all the time. And so this would be kind of an unfunded mandate to manage this species that's now back, or whether it's returned or it's newly discovered, something new, whatever it may be. I just think if there's any sort of, like I said, organized is probably too strong a word, plan, it just would have to do with the management of the animal. I don't think it's some grand conspiracy from the top down to keep everyone in the dark. I think it's probably as simple as that. The old adage of, follow the money. That's
Money
going to
talks,
take
right?
you. That's going to take you to the truth most of the time.
Yeah, I've said that so many times that's kind of the conclusion I came out with was a lot of these states, they deal with black bear, they deal with coyotes, whatever other sort of predators, omnivores they have. The mountain lion is something totally different.
Mm-hmm.
Why spend all this money and resources dealing with that if it's just hearsay and there may be one straggling through the area or coming through? And I think, as you mentioned, very acutely, there's just a big distrust of government. I think people like the idea of these large conspiracies, but yeah, I think the money talks. I mean, there was a similar situation in the state of Massachusetts with great white sharks along the coast of Cape Cod, where they've been coming back since federal legislation put the Mammal Protection Order in, or Mammal Protection Act, which stopped the culling of seals. So with exploding seal populations, guess who decided to come back with that? And there was a couple fatal attacks a few summers ago, one fatal, one non-fatal, but yeah, I talked to locals when I was there on the ground. They sort of said, yeah, well, they didn't really do anything until it was too late. So I think it's one of those, kind of wait until you absolutely have to do something, like begrudgingly, okay, fine, we'll start dealing with it now. And I just saw a parallel with this topic as well. Now, one thing I do constantly hear, doesn't matter where I go, I've heard this from Pennsylvania, New York, in the Midwest, is, oh yeah, there was that time the state brought in mountain lions, or they brought these things in to manage deer population, and they released them secretly, or they dragged away the body that was on the side of the road. Do you hear a lot of that down in your area as well?
You hear the rumors. I've never found anything, I guess, that you could call credible, but
Yeah.
the stories don't go away. They
Yeah.
are always present. I don't know where that comes from. This predator reintroduction thing. If there's one thing about the government, it's they've never been too friendly to predators. Big part of why we lost black bears and Mexican wolves and the Mexican grizzly and jaguars in Texas was because there was a huge program to poison them down along the
Yeah.
border and get rid of all the predators. To turn around, even though it's years later, to reintroduce predators, I just don't see that as something that they're going to do.
Right.
At least not with a lot of fanfare, looking for the pats on the back from the animal folks, and
Yeah.
I just
Right.
don't see them doing that secretly to control deer populations. Now,
Yeah.
the thing in Texas that I think gives it some credence in a lot of people's mind is not the deer population, it's the feral
Hogs.
hog population,
Yeah.
because they are immensely destructive, just invasive pests, and they breed like rabbits.
It's
It's
unbelievable. I mean, what I
unreal.
think the female hogs, they can, have 2 litters per year,
Oh,
basically,
at least,
which is
and they can have
staggering.
a lot at one time, and so we're losing ground in that battle,
Yeah.
and I think that I think if there were an alpha predator out there that could help to some degree, and we really don't have that. We have coyotes, out the wazoo, but
Yeah.
they can take piglets, they can take small ones, but they're not going to take on anything as big as
The
a
big ones, right?
full-grown boar or a sow 90% of the time. There's just easier pickings for them. So there's really not much out here that's to keep them in check. So I think that's where there's a certain logic to it that appeals to people as far as rumors of reintroduction. But when they start going, oh, and they were all black panthers that they reintroduced, then yeah, then you're starting to get into uh, some areas where I need to see some kind of proof on that. I just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. It's those stories that just they keep spinning, they keep going. Like I said, I
Mhm.
hear them all over the place. But yeah, those hogs, those are wow. I mean, I don't have much experience. We don't have hogs, at least in huge numbers up here. I've heard some rumors of hogs getting out of get game preserves, the hunting preserves they'll have, but nothing to the extent you have down there, of course. I'll never forget in Fouke, Arkansas, going out near Mercer Bayou, being out kind of in the stomping grounds of the Fouke monster and coming across this huge ripped up area that was hog devastation. It's like a dinosaur had come through and just torn through the area.
It's like, you'd think Godzilla had come through. They're amazingly hard on crops. They do just millions and millions of dollars of damage to the agriculture industry in Texas, not to mention what they do out, in the forest land and things like that. It's legal in Texas to basically have an automatic weapon and shoot them from helicopters. I mean, there are guys.
I've heard that.
Yeah, there are guys running guides that run those kind of trips down here, and they'll wipe out 20, 30 at a time, and still just we're losing.
It's like an onslaught. Unbelievable. Yeah, it's pretty wild. I don't think people understand the severity of it. But I have heard of that, the helicopter machine gun hog hunts. You can pay for them and go do it. I mean, if that's your thing. It's like pretty crazy, very, very Texas thing to do, I'd say. But I think just that the conspiracy stuff, people gravitate towards that naturally. But I mean, you do see some of the stuff that programs that the government have mismanaged in terms of with wildlife. I remember one of the craziest ones I read about was a few years ago. It was either in Idaho or Wyoming. There was a coyote overpopulation issue. So they were putting these sort of cyanide-like or poison gas landmine kind of things in the back of people's residential neighborhoods. And I remember there was a horrific story of some kid up there with his dog playing in the woods, and the dog found this thing and it exploded and poisoned the dog, and the kid was taken to the hospital. And I think the people were rightfully, why the heck is this going on? We didn't know about it. I mean, it just seemed like such a backwards approach to it. I don't know, but I mean, I think that comes down to the individual agencies. But I don't think that helps, obviously, then with rehabilitating their image with the public, right? And I think that's where there's a lot of this distrust in general. But it's absolutely fascinating. And I do want to take this one comment from Carrick, who said, I know exactly the image you're talking about, Mike. Reverse image search is a blessing when dealing so often with viral hoax narratives. Yeah, that's
absolutely. It's number one on the list when a picture comes in, for me. And some of them are shockingly easy to find.
Right. It's like the first page of Google images.
Yeah, exactly. It's just folks they want to believe whoever sent it to them, if they're not the hoaxer themselves. They want to believe Uncle John or whoever who sent it to them. And I can understand that. But and that's where, like I said, it gets a little dicey. I think someone's trying to pull one over on you. But yeah, it's very common. Very common.
Hey, Leon, how's it going? He says, finally made it halfway on the show. Awesome. Good to have you. So one thing I want to dive into, and again, I don't want to spend the whole time talking about mountain lions and mystery big cats, which I'm sure we obviously could, but this idea that, black panthers, obviously there's really no such thing as a black panther, right? It's a leopard or a jaguar that has that melanism, right? That's where it comes from, but people persistently see it or claim to have seen these things. And up here in the Northeast, we get them. They're probably only less than 10, maybe 10 to 15% of reports are of a black panther-like cat. The rest are, your typical tawny kind of mountain lions. But I've heard some very interesting sightings, including one, and I have no way to confirm this. This was told to me by a researcher, of somebody seeing two mountain lions. They said one was jet black and the other one was the tawny color, which they're not known to have melanism. Now, where do you kind of approach the Black Panther issue? What are your thoughts on it? It's so interesting because, again, it's another component of the mystery big cat question.
Mm-hmm. I struggle with the idea that there could be black pumas or mountain lions, simply from the fact that those cats have been in captivity and studied and raised, in zoos and facilities for years and years and years. And you would just think that if that were buried in their genetics, even as a recessive trait, at some point one would have popped up in captivity. And it just hasn't yet. So I struggle with that a little bit. The other part of that is, mountain lions are two-toned. They've got the tawny, honey-colored, sometimes even kind of a chestnut reddish color, but they're white around the muzzle, kind of like I am, and on the neck and belly, they're more of a cream color, and that's pretty much universal. The reports you get of these black cats is that they are jet black totally. They're monochromatic. There's no two-tone, no difference between the dorsal and ventral surfaces. So to me, they have to be a suspect in the whole thing because in every other way, size, the big long tail, the weight, they fit. It's just the color that doesn't fit. So, but I do struggle with it a little bit simply because they don't appear to carry those genetics. Now the Jaguar is probably number one on my list. They were native to Texas. Matter of fact, they were native to most of North America. The fossil record has them as far west as Washington State,
Wow.
through Ohio, Midwest, and into back in the East. They were, the saber-toothed cat gets all the love. The last ice age is the big predator, but their Jaguar was probably more numerous and the apex big cat predator during that time of the megafauna. But they were pretty much hunted out in Texas and across the South. The thing about them, though, is they do carry the genetics from melanism, and unlike leopards, that trait is dominant in jaguars. So if you had a population cut off from the bigger breeding population in Mexico or Central America, and you had a black one or two in the mix, it would not take long before that relic population or that isolated population could become all but black. And that would explain one of the questions I get is, well, if they're jaguars, how come no one ever reports seeing the spotted, the normally marked cats? That could be the explanation, because that genetic trait for melanism is dominant in jags. But on the other hand, the rosetted, the regular marked cats are being seen in Arizona. They're being seen in New Mexico. There are game cameras photos from out there. And if they could be there, they could be in Texas just as easily. And so that's one of my big suspects, is that I think maybe they're returning to their home range. I think maybe they were never totally gone, kind of like we talked earlier about the mountain lions in East Texas and across the South. And I do think some of the conservation work that's been done has helped them. There are a lot of things still going on as far as the timber industry goes, as far as cutting trees and things like that. But a lot of it is being done in a more responsible way than it used to be done. So I think that kind of thing has helped. Some land has been set aside, some preserves and national forests and all that kind of stuff has helped. Now in Texas, we have another small cat. It's not nearly as big as a mountain lion or jaguar, but it's called a Jaguarundi. And most people are completely unaware that it exists at all. They come in basically two color morphs, they call it. One's kind of a chestnut red, golden colored color, and the other is a very deep charcoal to black color. They're odd looking cats. They're otter-like almost. They kind of got these odd flat shaped heads, little round ears, but their bodies are very long and their tail is as long as their body. So they give the impression of being bigger than they are. Most of them aren't much bigger than a big house cat, but they're shaped differently. And I think that's perspective is always something we deal with with witnesses anyway. They can tell you where they were standing when they saw the cat, but was this thing 10 yards behind the fence post or was it 30 yards behind the fence post? And that makes a big difference as far as how big the animal might have been. And I think someone catching a glimpse of that long-bodied Jaguarundi, especially if it was one that's a little bigger than normal, and could very easily jump to that Black Panther conclusion.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, do you guys get any coda mundis or anything coming up from Mexico,
Oh
in that
yeah.
area. Yeah,
Well, we called them long-tailed coons where I
long-tailed coons.
grew up,
Yeah,
yeah, and, or long-nosed rather, long-nosed coons. South Texas are pretty common. Don't see many of them. I'm living in Central Texas now, don't see many of them up here.
yeah,
But occasionally, you hear about one that got hit on the road or something, but that's more of a South Texas.
yeah. Because I'm wondering if that would be a grounds for misidentification, perhaps. So also, if somebody wasn't familiar, they can also be pretty dark in color. I know they sort of have some kind of stripes as well, but because it kind of brings to mind, we have fishers up here. People call them fisher
Mhm,
cats. They're sort of like this big, aggressive weasel-like creature. Make horrific noises that I think a lot of people probably think are Bigfoot sounds.
mhm,
It's like somebody screaming, awful. But one of the biologists I'd interviewed in my mountain lion documentary had talked about when animals started coming back on the landscape after it had been heavily logged. There were fisher cats coming in, and his grandfather had sworn he had seen a black panther, and it turned out to be actually a fisher cat, which are they're fairly large, but nowhere near the size of a
mhm.
black, big cat or a mountain lion or anything like that. So I'm just wondering, what role other misidentifications play in that. But yeah, somebody had actually asked right as you'd mentioned Jaguarundi, they asked about that in the
Mhm.
chat, SoCom Smith. So I'm
Yeah,
glad.
the flaw, the deal with all these suspected, these Black Panther suspects is, none of the theories are bulletproof. It's
Yeah,
Jaguarundi, according to wildlife officials, extreme South Texas only, and they are not thought to range much farther north than what we call the Valley here in South Texas. For sure, no farther north than about Corpus Christi.
hmm.
Now, I don't believe that. I think that they have extended their range. Now,
Yeah,
how far, people want to argue with me starting right there, much less as to how far north and east they might have stretched. But there's a growing sentiment that there's a population in Florida.
mm.
Um, Now those were almost certainly introduced, by
Invasive. Yeah,
humans, and there's a story I detail in the book about a writer from Chiefland who, wrote a lot about the Mayans and the Aztecs and made a lot of trips to southern central Mexico and Central America, and it's thought to have brought some of these cats back. Now, why he would just turn them loose, I have no idea, but, there's a lot of folks who put stock in that story. And if that's true, then it's kinda like you were saying a minute ago. We've got them in Texas, we've got them in Florida, and maybe they're kinda, you know, moving along the Gulf Coast and coming together possibly. But, I do think at least sometimes people have seen Jaguarundi and made that mistake.
yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, Florida, when it comes to invasive species, is
Yeah, yeah.
I remember hearing a story even last year when I was down there about one of the state parks there where you can go see manatees, and they had this population of, I don't think it was baboons. It might have been, oh gosh, it was one of the monkey species that they basically live in this state park, and they're just sort of
Mhm.
living there now, and they
Well, yeah,
very
we
aggressive with people. People get their picnics ambushed all the time, and
yeah, we've
very
got some snow
mischievous.
monkeys down in South Texas
Oh
that,
wow,
same kinda deal. Yeah, I was, doing the research for the book. I was shocked at just how big the wildlife trade was, the black market is. It's, everything I found, it was second only to drugs and guns,
yeah. Is
as
isn't
far as the
Texas
black
one of the
market.
largest in the world for exotic
Oh,
animal
yeah,
market?
we do everything big, good or bad down here, and, for a long time, there wasn't much regulation on it at all.
Yeah.
It's starting to get a little better, but yeah, and, of course, that leads to another suspect in this whole deal is,
I was
you
just
know
gonna kind of transition into that.
yeah,
Yeah.
escaped exotics, and, certainly as far as, leopards go,
Right.
the black leopards are prized, but, I was really surprised the undisputed king of the exotic cat trade are tigers. I mean, it's not even close.
Yeah.
African lions are 2nd, leopards would come in a distant 3rd to those, and very few jaguars at all, which surprised me since they are New World cats. I kinda
Yeah.
thought they might be easier to acquire, but apparently they're they're kinda ill-tempered, and the leopards seem
Hmm.
to to do better in captivity than the jags do. That's why most of the black panthers you see in the movies are leopards and not
Yeah,
jaguars.
not jaguars, right?
And they're a little easier to work with apparently. But I think there have been some cases where an escapee has been spotted and seen, but they're almost always shot or recaptured very shortly after they get out. Most of them have been raised from cubs by humans, and they just don't know how to hunt. They don't know how to take care of themselves out there. There's a great story I came across when I was doing the book about a tiger. A guy in Arkansas had a tiger, and it just got too unruly and too expensive to feed, and it was just becoming more trouble than he ever thought it would be, and didn't have the heart to put it out of its misery. And now why he didn't take it to a zoo or something, I don't know, but he drove it.
People work in strange ways.
I forget exactly how far away he drove it. I want to say about 75, 100 miles, and he dumped it out in the woods, which is just a terrible idea. But went home. A week later, he came home from work, and it was asleep on his porch. It had made its way home. It was coming home. It couldn't take care of itself out there. It didn't know what to do. So I think that has happened from time to time, but they're almost always shot and killed. And I don't think that enough have escaped to form a breeding population.
Right.
That story, and then the circus train that
I was just going to mention that too. That's like the most common motif is the drug dealers and the train crash.
Apparently the circus train is the most dangerous mode of transportation ever devised by man, because they've all crashed somewhere and everything got out.
Even with a lot of Bigfoot stories. I mean, you have with the Honey Island Swamp Monster, Jacko.
Exactly. And so, but to think that enough have escaped to form a breeding population, I just don't find that feasible at all.
Yeah, it is just such an interesting phenomenon. Why are these sightings so persistent? And we talk about the jaguar. Obviously, there are jaguars. I remember being in Arizona and hearing stories of people saying, there's jaguars are kind of a cryptid there because they're seen coming, up through the border, and that makes sense. I mean, these animals, they don't understand that there's a country border or a state border. They just do what they're going to do, whatever, right? Looking for mates or resources, whatever the case may be. But yeah, that circus train thing pops up a lot. And what I hear up here is the drug dealer stuff. People say, it was some drug dealer. He had a black panther and he let it go. But we have very harsh winters up here. So I don't see how any of these animals from South America, other parts of the world, would be able to survive this climate. And in other parts of the country as well. I know in the Midwest, they have a lot of these sightings as well, black panthers as well. Tate says, hashtag Carol Baskin, hashtag Joe Exotic. Yeah, no, it's just something.
I want to make that clear. That was Oklahoma, not Texas. And I think Carol Baskin was Florida, if I'm not mistaken. So
talking about big cats, but something I really gained an appreciation for. The big cats in general after doing this kind of stuff with mountain lions and being a few feet from them, and you can feel the purring, and it's amazing. I mean, they're very fascinating animals. And this is something I talked with Gareth Patterson about, who worked with lions. I mean, he literally lived as a human member of their prides as he was rehabilitating lions in various parts of Africa, how intelligent big cats are. And with Matt, we talked about tigers ambushing trail cameras and, not
always from behind. Yeah.
They're extremely smart animals. So, I don't think we should underestimate these animals, whether they're mountain lions or not. But I just really don't know where I stand on the black panther question. It's just so strange.
It's one of those things. I think the most likely explanation, to be an Occam's razor kind of guy, is it's probably a combination of more than one thing. I think on occasion it's jaguars. I think on occasion people are seeing Jaguarundi. There's I did a chapter in the book on feral cats. Apparently down in Australia, wherever there's a feral cat problem, and we have one here in the United States, every town has a dog catcher.
Yeah.
They don't have anyone chasing cats around. The crazy cat ladies would string them up, if they did. And, but down in Australia, these ferals have they were originally turned loose to try to clean up another mess they made when the rodents got,
Yeah,
the
right.
Dutch had come, and all these rats and things had gotten off the ships and onto the mainland and were just running rampant. So they thought, well, we'll release some cats and that'll take care of that. And of course, that just started a whole nother problem. But there's nothing there anymore to keep them in check.
Yep.
And there's nothing I've found that would rule out over time in generations them getting bigger. They're mean. They're apex predators.
Right.
They are responsible for literally billions of bird and small animal mammal deaths a year. And if there's nothing to keep them in check, there's nothing to keep them from growing bigger over
Nothing to
generations.
stop them. Right.
And we have to remember, a generation to us versus in the animal kingdom, things move a little faster with the animals than they do. A generation for humans versus 2 or 3 generations for a cat. These are different things. And so things could be sped up a little bit as far as them growing bigger. But they have shot specimens down there approaching the size of small leopards that came back.
Wow.
DNA was Felis catus, just house cat. 70 pounds, 75 pounds, 6 feet
Oof.
from nose to the tip of the tail. Somebody sees that, they're going to think panther.
Right.
And
It makes sense. I mean, you see a lot of
if
these photos out of those
right.
places. Yeah.
And so when if it can happen there, I don't see a reason that it could not happen here too.
Sure.
And because we're kind of in the same boat as far as predators, we've hunted them all out basically. And if there's not, they're going to fill a niche, and if there's nothing to keep their population under control, there's no reason that at least some of them, from even if it's just the occasional specimen
Right.
that grows to an extraordinarily large size. If you see a 40 or 50 pound cat, you're not thinking that's grandma's tabby.
Yeah.
You're thinking something else. And if it can happen down in Australia, I don't see why it can't, at least on occasion, happen here as well.
Yeah, and then I think it also, there's in the UK, obviously they have, and I think Australia kind of gets lumped in with that, the ABCs as they call it, right? The
Right.
alien big cats, and maybe that's sort of the same thing going on. But I think the underlying theme is that humans are kind of at the bottom of it all. We are the ones who change the environment. We, especially here in the East, and I'm going to say the whole kind of Eastern seaboard, Eastern United States, down to the South, we extirpated these animals that were part of the landscape, right? They were probably the apex right at the top. And since then, you've had uncontrolled. The deer problem is huge up here. We got a lot of deer. I mean, so there's
It's
infinite
the same here.
resources. And
There's
hogs. I mean, you guys have the hogs, which are also
Mhm.
introduced to that area.
I
So
read an interesting statistic that said there's more deer, white-tailed deer on the North American continent now than there were when George Washington was president.
I totally believe it.
Because the wolves are gone, the bears are gone, we've just thinned out the predators so drastically
Yep.
that they just exploded. And it's an issue. It's an issue.
And it's
But
amazing. I mean,
go
go
ahead. I'm
ahead.
sorry. No, I was just going to say,
No,
but if they are trying to come back now, there's at least for the moment, there's just a rock solid prey base for them.
totally. Yeah.
So the idea that there's not enough space or there's not enough food, those are invalid in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And as far as them not being seen more often, cats are stealth in the flesh. You're not going to see them very often. A cat of any kind that doesn't want to be seen,
Yep.
you're not going to see very often. Bobcats, for example. People see them, but how many more of them are there out there than mountain lions, for example? And you're still not seeing them very often. And mountain lions they're like ghosts out there. You hardly see them at all.
Yeah.
So I think there's plenty of room. There's plenty of food. The fact that they aren't seen more often, to me, that's just the species. That's just cats in general. So I find those arguments are not valid. There are some that, well, why this, why that? Well, we don't know yet. But those particular arguments I don't think are valid.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can drive out tonight and see 40 deer in a night in some of these
Mm-hmm.
farms, in the rural areas. It's unbelievable. Just shine a flashlight, and you'll see just all these eyes lighting up. It's very, very common. So that idea that the food is not here, I mean, I know it's an amazing bounce back. If you think just about 100 years ago, give or take, with the Great Depression, a lot of wildlife was almost hunted to extinction because people couldn't provide food. They couldn't buy food. What'd you do? You pick up a rifle, go to the woods. Makes sense, right? A lot of these species were almost hunted to extinction. So now you have this bounce back. And there's actually a comment that I was just going to address this point. Donald Fuller says, not as many people hunting deer. Yeah, there's less people in the woods hunting today. A lot of people, we rely on factory farming and that kind of stuff. So it's just not, in general, as we used to live closer to the land 100, 200 years ago.
It's kind of just a natural progression of our shift from a rural agriculture-based society to the whole industrial revolution. We're now city dwellers, and we work in town, and fewer people live in the rural areas, and so that tradition of hunting is waning, and so that's a problem. But it also lends itself to what we talked about previously about now, people aren't living out in rural areas anymore. They don't know their wildlife anymore. And so mistakes are made in identification. And so it's just this cycle that I hope it's a cycle, which would mean it would come back around, but I'm not convinced that it really is. And then you get the anti-hunting folks are very vocal, and a lot of people who are interested in it just I'm not getting into all that. It's just not worth it.
It's a hot topic. Yeah,
it's a hot button issue. So,
and I think that's a shame because, I mean, if you look at the way hunting traditionally was done, putting trophy hunting, that sort of stuff aside, utilizing all different parts of the animal, and that's what people used to do. And it's a shame that it's like that. But I think, like you said, we've moved so far away from nature. Most people are completely disconnected from the woods and
most people don't realize it's hunters that are paying most of the conservation dollars that are out there coming from hunters and fishermen when they purchase
all those permits and tags,
and stamps, and that's where a lot of this money's coming from, and nobody wants to take care of the resource more than the hunters and the fishermen out there. And a lot of people don't realize that.
No.
It's and they would rather see an entire herd of deer, scrawny, all of them weighing 70 pounds with the ribs, poking through their hide, than culling some of them because there are limited resources for them.
Yeah.
And so it just, to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I think when you start, and this is a debate I get into when we talk about the Bigfoot stuff, should a specimen be collected?
Right.
I tend to think in terms of a population as opposed to an individual. I think culling some deer, if that's better for a healthier overall population, then that's what should be done. That's what's going to keep the genetics strong. That's what's going to keep them healthy. Then that's what needs to be done. When it, to the extreme of wood ape, Sasquatch, we want, in the NAWAC, for example, we want to protect them. But you can't ask the government to put aside land for a mythical animal. You might as well be asking for a unicorn sanctuary to be established right now. You have to first prove they're real. It's unfortunate. I don't necessarily want to be the one to do it.
Yeah.
But it's going to take, for something that extraordinary, it's going to take a specimen. And at that point, what the hope is, one is taken, and then they're real. Okay, here's everywhere they've been seen, and we can start the conservation work at that point, trying to preserve habitat, because I don't think that particular species has anything to worry about from human beings as far as hunters, because if that was the case, we'd have found them years ago. I think it's habitat destruction that will be what takes them out, if anything does. And you can't ask the government to set aside land for something that officially does not exist. And
Yeah.
that's the race that we find ourselves in.
And I think just, getting back to that point about hunting and everything, I think people think that just because it comes from nature, it's automatically better. We should just let nature take its course. But the problem is we've already messed with the environment so much. We've changed the landscapes, logged it, you made all these animals extinct, all these predators, kicked them out. So, why would we just suddenly let it go if we need to manage it, because it's basically our fault that the deer populations are exploding in the first place. So I think
That's 100% true. Yeah, that's
people just
absolutely
get
true.
this misconception in general. And I think when it comes to the Sasquatch topic, I mean, there's just so many unknowns, and I think people get really agitated. And there's a certain segment of people who think that, we're dealing with a human species, right, that's in the woods, and there's that kind of line of thinking. And I think generally most people feel that it's going to take either a body or a part of a body or something like that. But that's something I think we can definitely get into. I do want to just take a few questions. Kevin put in $10 Canadian super chat. This is to buy PBR for Tate. I'm sure he's parish. Well, next time I see Tate, I will give him 10 Canadian dollars so he can get himself some PBR. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. This was just before we kind of transition to the Bigfoot topic. Carrick had a question that said, it's a rather strange subject, but Mike displays a lot of knowledge on cat species. Has he caught wind of the supposed horned cats of the Javan Islands? Very specific. Awesome.
Yeah, only in the sense I've heard of it. I've heard of the rumor, the myth, the tale, whatever, however you might want to put it. I don't have any expertise in it. I'm just an East Texas guy here. Java's a long way away, and the whole thing's fascinating. Like we talked about when we first came on, if it's weird and odd, I'm intrigued by it. But I don't have any expertise in that. But I have heard similar. I'm guessing it's what she's talking about. I've heard about things like that, but I don't. Like I said, I don't have any real knowledge on it.
Right. Papa Craig says, "Come to Eastern Oregon, my friends. We've got our predators back. Please send deer. I'll send you some deer. Michael can send you some hogs."
Be careful what you ask for, because those hogs get up there. You're gonna wish that they weren't.
Yeah,
they are something. They are.
Oh
something.
boy. So we had a question from Jonathan. Let me just find it. Oh, it was quite a ways back. So Jonathan Dodd, what is going on, man? Excited to see you at CryptidCon, dude. Definitely come visit my table. I'll come visit you. But he says, hey, folks, Michael, in your research, when it comes to big cats and Sasquatch, do you see any correlations in behavior? Definitely an interesting question.
It is a good question. And the answer is yes. When I got into the Black Panther thing almost by accident years ago when I had started the blog. And I started the blog initially because I'm interested in, like I said, a whole lot of different things. I'm not just kind of one-dimensional into the Bigfoot thing only.
Right.
While it's fascinating, and certainly there's enough there to keep you busy for a lifetime. I'm interested in a lot of things, and so I started the blog as kind of an outlet for my interest outside that one particular topic. And I did a post. I saw a news article in the Dallas Morning News about a Black Panther sighting outside of Plano, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas, kind of on the northeast side of Dallas.
Frito-Lay make a lot of chips there, right?
And so I did a little blog post on it, and my inbox just blew up. And I had talked about a lot of stuff, but that was the first Black Panther post I had done. And every time after that, I published something on the topic, the same thing would happen. And it just seems that a lot more people have had experiences with these black cats. And down here where I am, if you get in a room with 25 people, somebody's going to have seen one, or someone's going to say they know someone who's seen one. You can't get away from it down here, and it's very much that way across the South. It's a much more common thing than a Sasquatch sighting is. And people that would look at you like you're a kook if you mention Bigfoot will fight you if you try to tell them that Black Panthers don't exist. That they'll completely turn a 180 on you, and they get very upset when you tell them, well, they're not supposed to be real either. And I know.
Right. Oh man.
Dang good and well they're real. I saw one, and I know what I saw, and you start to hear all that. But as far as the question, so when I decided, I got all these reports, I said, I should do something with these. And so that's where the idea of the book came from. So I started to plot the sightings on a map. And and after I had what I felt like was a pretty good, a valid number of sighting reports to go on that I had vetted and felt like were legitimate, I said, this really looks familiar. And so I went and I did an overlay with the wood ape sightings in Texas, and it was almost identical. There were a few more outliers out west with the cats than there were with the ape sightings, but it was all but identical.
Yeah.
If you take the middle of the state and go east, the eastern half, that's the heavily forested portion of the state. That's the portion of the state that gets the most rainfall as you get closer to the Gulf of Mexico. The rivers and streams and creeks get more numerous and start to converge, and it's just a much richer environment for prey and predator on the
a lot of swamps and that sort of stuff in the area.
And so in that way, there was very much a correlation. And it, if you think about it, it's exactly what you would expect of a living, breathing predatory species. It's going to be where the water is. It's going to be where the prey is, with some outliers, some exceptions. So in that regard, yes, there are some correlations as far as at least where the reports are coming from.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Very, very interesting. Kevin has a comment saying, much like your deer analogy, there are more trees in North America now than 100 years ago, too. So I don't think the overlogging should be a main problem. That, too, is super interesting. Yeah.
Well, yes and no. I would just throw this out there for food for thought.
Sure.
When an area is clear cut, the problem is, like I said, logging is being done in a much more responsible manner than it used to be done.
Definitely. Look at the redwoods.
What's happened? There's a huge difference between a hardwood forest and a coniferous, a pine forest, or a cedar forest, for example. The hardwoods are going to provide a much richer environment. These fruit-bearing trees, your hickory nuts, your black walnuts, your pecans, and so on. They're going to feed the prey base, basically. And so when that mast is healthy, you're just going to have tons of wildlife, and then that's going to bring your predators in. The problem, somewhat at least, with the clear cuts is they'll cut a hardwood forest and they'll replant with what we call down here slash pine. They're fast growing pine, and the coniferous trees just do not provide nearly as rich an environment for wildlife as the hardwood trees do. So he's right as far as there are more trees. Certainly, he's 100% right about that. But you want to dive into it a little deeper. A lot of it is the type of tree. Some of these, you'll hear the term sterile forest because there's just no nourishment in a pine forest. I'm sure you're familiar with Dr. John Bendernagel. He was a well-known biologist that looked into the Sasquatch. Wrote a couple of great books on the topic.
His first book is one of my favorite Bigfoot books. It's like a wildlife guide. I would put it next to a Peterson guide,
Oh, absolutely.
Amazing.
And he made a visit, I was probably going on 15 or 20 years ago now, to the Southeast Texas, Louisiana area. And I quoted him in both the book, the Shadow Cats book, and in the book I'm writing now, which is more of a Bigfoot book,
Hmm.
quoted him. He said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that any animal living in down here where we are in these hardwood bottoms would require a much smaller home range than the same species back in the Pacific Northwest, where the woods are primarily coniferous.
Yeah.
And so, even though the vast expanse, our forests are kind of fragmented, they're not all contiguous like they used to be. And there's a lot of privately owned, still heavily wooded, but privately owned land. It would require less land, less room for a big cat, for example, to make a living than it would back up in the Pacific Northwest. They'd have to range much farther, much longer,
Yeah.
to basically make a living and find the resources they needed than they would down here. And so again, it just kind of comes back to what kind of forest are we talking about? Because there's really no contest between a hardwood and a pine forest or a coniferous forest as far as richness of and providing that prey base and that fruit, those nuts and such to support the prey base, which would bring the predators in.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things that when, again, big cats, they're just so sly, and like you mentioned, the smaller environments. I think it must have been Dr. Anna Nakaris studying slow lorises. I remember hearing a talk she gave a few years ago about, oh gosh, I don't want to say it was Indonesia or somewhere in Southeast Asia, where there was an island where they supposedly had I think it would have been a leopard in that case. They said there's no way these things could live the way the environment was impacted by human beings. It was severely logging, lots of stuff going on, human factors pushing animals out. And a group of, I guess, leopard researchers kind of went to her and said, hey, when you're out there looking for these things, we're just trying to prove that there definitely are no leopards here. We know they're not here. They can't be here. We're just using this as sort of a control factor in our larger study, right? That was their kind of control. And I guess on the game cameras, while looking for slow lorises, they got leopards there.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's dicey business trying to prove a negative anyway.
Yeah. So cats are incredibly sly, and as I mentioned, that example of the mountain lion killed an hour outside of New York City, in one of the most densely populated areas in the country, slinking around, was very rarely seen. Probably eating people's pets.
Yeah, that's a topic I cover a little bit, touch on, but I've kind of got a pet theory that maybe they're starting to figure out how to live in closer proximity to people. I mean, the comparison I make is between coyotes and wolves. Wolves couldn't do it, and they all but died out. They were all but gone. They just couldn't live in close proximity to people without getting into livestock and pets and making a nuisance of themselves, so they got hunted out. Coyotes, on the other hand, thrived in close proximity to people, garbage dumps, and
opportunists.
Down in Houston, they've had to delay flights because coyotes are running around on the runways and things, because there's these big, vast, big jets, need a lot of room to land and take off, and there's these vast wooded areas, these green belts that run along, the bayous and the little creeks and streams, and so there's just full of coyotes. They figured it out, and I have posited that maybe the mountain lions have started to figure it out a little bit. I've had a lot of reports from some surprisingly urban areas, but they're the areas that are all but abandoned. Your old warehouse districts, these neighborhoods. Like you see these pictures of like Detroit, for example, on TV. These entire neighborhoods are gone, and now the yards are all grown up.
It's like a scene out of Walking Dead.
Yeah, they're overrun with rodents and stuff, and almost every major city is built on a river. It's built on a water source. That's why it got started there in the first place. And even if they're just traveling through, there's enough cover and enough lonesome spots to support them, at least for brief periods of time. So I'm really starting to wonder if they're like the coyotes did, if they're starting to figure it out a little bit,
Yeah.
because the alternative would be, to go extinct. And there was a couple of leopards that were living in a very urban area in India. Talk about in the book, and they tried to relocate. They were deemed problem animals, even though they had never been a problem at all. They were just living in that close proximity to people that was dangerous. But they actually bred. They were residents. They weren't transient. They were residents. They at least one pair bred and had little ones, and they tried to relocate them, and they took them 50, 60 miles out in the jungle, and they came back. And
home is home, right?
well, and it kind of, makes you wonder about going to the expense and the time of relocation, if that's what's going to happen. But they had figured it out. They had finally gave up, and they put tracking collars on them, and they got within 15, 20 yards of domestic homes and never messed with pets, never were acted in a threatening manner to people. People didn't even see them. The occasional goat would disappear from somebody's little flock, but very rarely were they seen, and they were not a problem, and they were living in a densely populated area. And so, again, I just wonder if it's not possible that, to some degree, at least more so than it used to be, that whatever these panthers are and these stray mountain lions, if they really are coming back, if they haven't figured it out, that hey, if we behave ourselves, there's a lot of grub around here that we don't have to work too hard for. Yeah.
Oh, I think people underestimate the way animals can adapt. I mean, there's evidence. This is not something that's far-fetched either. There's evidence that animals can adapt within a generation or two of being around humans or environmental factors. So it's completely plausible. I mean, I remember hearing about a coyote seen in Central Park in New York City. I think there's still sightings.
Oh, there's a pack that lives and there's a pack that lives in downtown Chicago. There was a great article about that. It's been some years back now, but they lay low in the alleys during the day, and they come out at night, and it can be done. It's just a matter of, has it been done, I guess. And in the past, the bigger species seem to struggle with it, but but maybe they figured it out.
I mean, we have some of the data from out west. A lot of these states where people live, where there's large numbers of mountain lions. I'm talking, the Rockies and westward. People they deal with mountain lions on a regular basis. There was a big thing about some of those houses up in the Hollywood Hills as they expanded, all those mega mansions that the celebrities built up there in the hills, right? As they keep pushing and pushing into territory that's mountain lions, they're getting constant interactions with these creatures. I remember, I think, one video of a lady doing a news report, and she thought was a dog, I guess, walked by her.
Yeah, I remember that.
And they thought it was, I don't know if I think it did turn out to be a dog in the neighborhood, but people were saying that was a mountain lion. She thought it was like a harmless dog. So animals are extremely adaptive, but you do see out west, I think, mountain lions to some extent. I mean, there really are not that many attacks.
Probably the best example is a mountain lion called P22 that lived in Griffin Park in Los Angeles.
Yeah, amazing.
And it was for several years it lived there, and it never really made a nuisance of itself, threatened anybody. You got joggers and walkers, and people walking their dogs through there, and it never gave anyone any trouble. Several times, and again a little further west, we had one walk right through downtown El Paso a few years back, just strolling down the road, no apparent reason, and yeah, I just think maybe they're becoming a little more comfortable, a little better at living in closer proximity to people than previous generations of animals did.
Yeah, that's something I've heard. I mean, we look at how many fatal attacks there have been with mountain lions across North America. There are really not that many. A lot of these big animals, there's more attacks from domestic dogs or things that we would deem not as frightening. I think maybe misunderstanding. We misunderstand.
Well, yeah, and if you look, and if this is really happening, if they're learning this, selection is going to pick the more careful ones,
Right.
maybe the ones that are less aggressive toward people. Black bears have thrived where grizzlies were all but made, sent to extinction, because black bears typically, not every time, but most of the time, they run. They're going to
They
go up
want
a
to
tree,
heck out
they're
of
going to
Dodge.
run
Yeah.
away. Grizzlies are going to stand their ground and fight. And so they got shot. Black bears run away. People lowered the weapon when the bear runs away, but when it stands its ground or charges, that bear's going to get shot. And
Right.
so, natural selection is going to favor the ones that have figured out, if I just stay away from these funny two-legged guys, I'm going to be okay. And the more aggressive ones are going to get weeded out of the population.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things, just, the way we interact with our environment and all these other animals. It's so interesting. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, just how much we've changed these environments, but this adaptive behavior. I mean, I think people, especially if people keep on going into these habitats, we're gonna have to get used to it. I mean, people deal with living with these animals in lots of different places. But I do want to hop over to some questions. I do have to read this comment because it kind of cracked me up from Kevin. He says Bendernagel might only be second in Bigfoot knowledge to Robbie Knievel. He's obviously seen that documentary. That's good. That's a good kind of inside joke. I like that, Kevin. Excuse me.
I like that.
That is funny. Kevin always has some funny stuff to say. But there's a question from Tate. He asks, would prey for cats be the same or similar to what bears would prey on in the wilderness U.S., or is it surprisingly different?
As far as the carnivorous aspect of things, I think it would be pretty similar. Bears are considered omnivores. They're
Very opportunistic.
They're gonna tear up stumps and look for grubs and worms and things like that.
They love the blueberries up here.
The berries and the shoots and the all that kind of stuff. They're going to be into as well. As far as the meat aspect of it, I think a cat is going to be much more likely to take a deer than a bear, most of the time, as well as the smaller little critters around. I think a cat is going to be a little more effective as a hunter, and they would have to be because they're specialized. They don't eat the berries. They don't. Well, we say that, but they're not considered to be the omnivores that bears are. So in a lot of ways, yeah, I think they do share some as far as their diet goes, but bears are really eating more of the vegetation matter really than they are the protein, the animals, whereas a cat is strictly, I would say, at least 99% carnivorous. So that would be the difference, I suppose.
Yeah, there's a lot of different behaviors and adaptations. No, it's a great question. Appreciate that, Tate. I don't think people understand, that bears, I guess they sort of are in these environments that mountain lions are not supposed to be in. They are kind of the top predator, even though they might not necessarily be in a situation of the apex, because they're not solely a predator. They'll go through your garbage. I mean, how many people have had encounters with black bears, garbage cans, or, as I mentioned, blueberries? That's a huge thing up here. I noticed that with Bigfoot sightings too. People see what they think is a bear, and it turns out to be a Sasquatch. That happens a lot up here, I think, in this part of the country and into Canada as well. That seems to be pretty common. But on that topic on Bigfoot, I want to talk about the NAWAC. So I think I'll just start out with this question from Kara because I really like the question. I don't want to rehash the same stuff I talked with Matt about. He did a great job talking about some of the more recent stuff with the NAWAC, and he was talking about the recent field outings. So I want to kind of dive into a little bit more specifics. But Carrick asks, Mike, I understand that the NAWAC must get a lot of repeating questions. I'd like to ask what the group's experiences and findings suggest to you, what Sasquatch might be, how does it live, if real?
Okay. I have seen nothing that would lead me to believe that it's some sort of primitive human. Now, I'm an open-minded guy. I mean, I believe in Bigfoot, so that tells you I'm a pretty open-minded guy, right? I'm open to evidence to the contrary, but I haven't seen it yet. Our experience is intimidation behavior, the shaking of brush, the bluff charges, things, the throwing of rocks and sticks and growls and howls and classic intimidation behavior that can all be found in the great apes of the world. Now, what's unique about them is that they've kind of combined, a gorilla does this one thing, orangutan will do this, chimps do this. They seem to have it all kind of in one, so that's kind of unique. But it's all classic great ape behavior. And one thing I like to stress is there's a lot more that goes into being a human than walking on two legs.
Right.
And we haven't seen evidence of true, what we'd call culture, I suppose. A lot of tool use, other than rudimentary things like, maybe we have what we call found what we call nut crushing stations, where there's a big rock and there's what we call a hammerstone about the size of a brick, and we find all this crushed nut debris under it. Where
that's similar to what great apes do. Yeah.
Right, but again, chimps do that.
Right.
And so they don't adorn themselves. They don't wear clothing. They don't seem to have language. Now, that doesn't mean they don't communicate. This is where sometimes people start to get a little fired up. I'm not saying they don't.
You're a dirty aper, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not that they don't communicate, but there's a difference between that and true language, and they don't seem to. You think about people. They collect stuff. They like their stuff. And even when we die, we have these ceremonies and things, we die, you go back to the ancient peoples that even when they're buried, they were buried with their stuff, and these guys seem to travel light, that they're not into all that. And so to me, the theory that checks the most boxes, and it's not perfect, is it's a descendant of Gigantopithecus,
Right.
if not Gigantopithecus itself. It's a descendant thereof. That seems to be the theory, like I said, that checks the most boxes. Now, if I were to see something that would lead me to believe otherwise, I'm open-minded. But just looking at the things that I've observed, that our group members have observed, reported, and we take copious field notes, just volumes and volumes of field notes, and we haven't seen anything that doesn't fall under what we would consider great ape behavior.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not yet.
Right. No, and it's interesting. I know there's a little bit of a, divide now, I'd say, between people leaning a little bit more towards, primitive human-like creatures, something paranthropus line. I kind of lean a little bit more that way, but I haven't done as nearly as much research as you guys obviously have, or spent time with that. But Gigantopithecus theory, I think, is a pretty solid one. And I think even when we're talking about the fossils, the fossil evidence, or the lack thereof, when it comes to Gigantopithecus as being a precedent for, largest ape in history, yet all you have are a certain amount of teeth and small fragments.
And what a lot of people don't realize too is, like, all these different human lineages that have been dug up and found, you could fit all of it in the trunk of a car. It's so sparse. It is so hard to come across. And I think chimps weren't discovered in the fossil. If you went by the fossil record, chimps would not have existed until about I want to say the 40s. That may not be right. But I mean, they weren't in the fossil record that anybody had found yet, but we knew they were real. But, we hadn't, if you go strictly by that, what we had found in the ground, then no, they're not real. There's no evidence. So, it's one of those deals. No matter what you believe, you can't prove it. So I don't spend a lot of time getting upset about it, or don't particularly want to. I mean, we can debate our points. It's just that seems to be almost a lost art these days. Somebody, two people that can debate civilly without getting all upset. So it's not that I want to avoid the topic by any means, but I'm not interested in fighting about it or arguing about it. It's just because you get right down to it, we don't know. They're theories, they're hypotheses. So hopefully one day we will know.
Yeah, definitely. No, and it's I think it's interesting when looking at the other ape behaviors, and it's hard to not draw a parallel. I mean, one of the biggest ones that I think, I don't know if people don't register it, but it just really interests me, is the smell aspect. I mean, you have that skunk ape. Obviously, maybe that's an environmental thing, but swamps don't smell that bad. I mean, actually, if you look at the way swamps work, like the Honey Island swamp, those areas, they filter themselves. They're very, I don't know what the proper word would be, but they're not as smelly, I don't think, as people might imagine. Um, in terms of horrific, kind of horrendous smells that are described with Bigfoot kind of stuff, but how that's only a percentage of encounters in other parts of the country or across North America where there's smell involved. And then we have that factor of gorillas being able to control their scent glands when angry or agitated. I mean, that's just,
well, it's interesting.
How could you not look at that?
We've encountered, and I'll speak from personal experience here, what we call it's almost an equine smell. It's a sweaty horse smell. It's like if you've been riding a horse hard and then you take the saddle off, it's that kind of that sour, sweaty horse smell, for lack of a better term. It's not a horrible smell. It's not an overpowering smell. But it's a wild animal kind of smell.
Right.
We've encountered that quite a bit. I have only once in all these years, and I'm going on well into getting close to 20 years doing this. One time have I smelled that horrific garbage, rotten carcass kind of smell and felt that it was directly related to one of these animals in the vicinity. One time. Much more often, we smell this other, equine-like smell, and it's not really an unpleasant smell, but it is clearly an animal, smell. So yeah, it's my experience and our experience in general is that really awful stench you hear so much about. We haven't encountered it all that often.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I think that the smells very widely range in terms of what people describe. So I don't know. I think there needs to be a lot more kind of a study or looking into that. But New Hampshire Sasquatch says the nut cracking stations is a topic I've heard a few times up here. Super interesting. Yeah, it really is. I mean,
well, it is. I mean,
primitive tool use.
You think about it. I mean, what can do that? You have to have hands to do that.
Right.
Bears
Squirrels can crack nuts, but not using rocks, right?
Right. Bears can't pick up rocks and, hammer and open up hickory nuts and so forth. In that regard, it's similar to the objects that are thrown, rocks and stones and such. You got to have hands to do that. There's only two possibilities. There's either some guy out there who's taking his life in his hands by doing that, or it's one of these animals. There isn't simply no other possibility. It's not flying squirrels dropping nuts on us, dive bombing us. It's not bears. It's, it could only possibly be one of two things. And if people could see where we're operating, you would quickly realize that the chances of it being other human beings are just practically nil. I mean, it's just not happening. Especially if they're going to don some kind of ape suit and try to run around out there. That's just
suicidal.
It's suicidal, but it's also just not practical. You can't move. That stuff is so thick. The brush is so thick. The footing is so uneven. It's the rockiest place I've ever been.
I think, that's what Kathy was saying, having been out west, the roads, whatever, in the mountains are bad. But she said the worst road she's ever driven on was going into X.
Well, we kind of like it that way, for various reasons. But yeah,
weed out the Honda Civics.
True. Yeah, it's it's no lover's lane. Nobody's going to go down there for any reason, because it's just the chances of we've had people go in there and get 4 flat tires, on the way in or out. I mean, at one time, and it's it's pretty to call it a road is an insult to real roads, everywhere. It's really rough, and it's the chances, like I said, of somebody being out there in the middle of nowhere like that, I think as the crow flies, we are at least 8 or 9 miles from the nearest blacktopped road. And like I said, that's as the crow flies. And to get in where we are, it's not that long a drive, but it takes basically 2 hours, because you just got to poke and crawl and really choose your, how you're steering that road, because it's just awful. It is just awful. And if people could see that, I think they would realize why we don't feel like the hoaxing thing, at least in that particular spot, is a valid concern.
Sure. No, and like you said, I'm sure you prefer it that way. It's good to have an area like that. So Papa Craig C asks, have any of you guys seen their face?
Yeah, well, one of our members had a very striking account as a kid. Now, and there's a sketch that's on our website. Now, you might have to dig around a little bit for it. But yeah, it's the nose is like our nose, but flatter and wider, if that makes sense. It's I think the term might be hooded, I believe. Is it's not like open nostrils like you would see on a chimp or gorilla. It's more human-like, from what people have said. Hair basically around the eyes and around the mouth is a little more sparse. A lot of times you could see people have reported seeing the skin in those areas maybe a little lighter, kind of a grayish color. Eyes tend to be a little recessed. I don't think anybody has talked about these huge brow ridges, more than a human for sure, but these deep recessed eyes like you hear sometimes about. I don't think anybody's talked about that too much, but our glimpses are so fleeting, and usually it's the backside. It's so detailed observation is, as far as details that fine, are hard to come by sometimes. The times when we get a little longer look from time to time tend to be thermal hits at night, where you're not going to see those kinds of details. But that nose thing is one thing that we have heard. Less hair on the face, palms of hands, soles of feet. Sometimes you hear a little sparser on the chest area, but still present, but just maybe not quite as thick as it is in other parts. We've had a couple of people talk about a little shaggier around the shoulders than the rest of the body, but the face itself is, it's just the glimpses are so fleeting. It's really hard to say.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I have heard of other encounters where people get really a good look at the face, and the descriptions are varied. But it's always great to see those sketches that people have. I know there's some folks out there in the community and elsewhere that will do recreation drawings of eyewitness encounters, and those are always really interesting. I like looking at those quite a bit. Just kind of gives you an idea, or how they do those sketches for police.
Right.
Eyewitness form. So it's I think it's a great thing that witnesses, anyone who's had an encounter, should probably kind of look into getting that done, to the best of your recollection. Two comments, one from New Hampshire Sasquatch says he just gave me chills. It's making me reminisce on my encounter. And then Papa Craig says, sounds exactly like what I saw. So there you go. Really interesting. Always love when we have some people who have had their own experiences.
Hey, that makes me feel better too. Don't it makes us feel better too. But again, the more, and again, credible is the key word. And to some people, of course, no sighting is credible because there's no such thing, right? It's
all, people are all stupid.
When you really vet people and you really talk to people and you weed out those who aren't serious or those who you think made a mistake.
Yeah, and there's tons of those, I
Well,
think,
there
where
are, I mean, the classic,
misidentifications, and they're
yeah,
sincere about it. They're
the
not
the
lying.
classic example I use for that, there was a lady I talked to in deep East Texas years ago, and bears had been native to that area, black bears, forever, but they were hunted out. They were just gone. We only
Right.
had bears in far west Texas and along the Mexico border, but they had at some point Louisiana kind of restocked. Well, there's a subspecies called a Louisiana black bear, but
Hmm.
Arkansas brought in, and Oklahoma, I believe, brought in some Manitoba black bears and
Oh, wow.
stocked down there. They did do that. That's a known program that happened. But
Sure.
anyway, the bears started to do better. They were protected, but it had been generations since East Texas had seen bears, and so believe it or not, they were more familiar with what a Sasquatch was supposed to look like than they were a bear. So I talked to this lady. I was driving down the road, and out comes this big hulking black thing, and it's on 4 legs, and it comes out the middle of the road. It stops. I brought the car to a stop. It stood up on 2 legs, looked at me, kind of sniffed, dropped back down to 4 legs, and went across the road into the woods. And you questioned her. I said, well, tell me about the face. She goes, oh, well, it was a tan color. The face was a tannish color. The rest of it was black. I said, okay, were the back legs long or short? Well, they're kind of short. Like, okay. I said, what about the nose? Oh, she goes, well, it stuck out, well, she saw a black bear,
Right.
and the way it acted is classic black bear curiosity. It's going to stand up. It's going to look. She wasn't lying. She
No.
had just there had never been black bears in those woods in her whole life. And she was in her 60s at the time, I believe. But she had seen the TV shows about Bigfoot.
Right.
And so she wasn't lying. She was mistaken.
Sure.
And I'm not sure I made her feel better. I think she was more afraid that there was a bear running around
Right.
to her place than there was a possible ape of some kind. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, it happens. It happens. But
That takes us back to the Jaguarundi, or
exactly.
the fisher. Animals seen in areas that they're not supposed to be in, or formerly kind of reintroduced to their range or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
People make mistakes, and that's sincerity. It's just it's okay to make that mistake. They're not maliciously saying they saw a Bigfoot when it turns out to be a
Absolutely.
bear. It's maybe far
Absolutely.
away, or as you mentioned, something they weren't familiar with. So I think that's certainly a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
It has
but
to
it is kind of reassuring when someone corroborates what you've seen. So
yeah.
I get where these folks are coming from with that. Myself, what really kicked me into high gear was had a visual in 2015 in East Texas, and I kind of kept it to myself for months, and finally reported in the NAWAC did not exist yet. It was still the TBRC, the Texas Bigfoot
Right.
Research Center, and talked to them, and came to find out that just a month before they had run an operation, and that as the crow flies, less than 2 miles from where I had my visual, and one of their members had seen and described the animal. They really grilled me. A guy named Daryl Collier, who's become a dear friend.
Right.
He grilled me. It was like a Columbo episode or
Interrogation.
something. He would ask me the same question 3 different ways, to see if I
Trying to
and
crack you.
yeah. So finally he said, well, everything you're describing, it sounds exactly like the animal that this other member saw a month ago when we were up there. And so that, I can't tell you how much better that made me feel.
Sure.
Because there was actually a buddy of mine was with me. We both saw it. And I've said before, if I had been by myself, I never would have told anybody, I don't think.
Right.
But he was there to back me up, and I to back him up, and vouch for one another. But then to get that outside, support that, hey, go read this report here. And it sounded just exactly like, well, not just the same type of animal. It sounded like the same animal.
Wow.
By the description. And so to get that kind of to be backed up like that, that a lot of times makes people feel better. And the people we talk to, a lot of times they're just looking for someone to listen to them and not just call them a crackpot, you know.
Yeah, people deal with that enough.
So
Yeah, no, I think it's good, especially if somebody has an encounter, if they're obviously dealing with the ridicule factor. That's a big part of it. But someone like yourself that's actually into the research, or if I was to have an encounter, I would love somebody to grill me so that I can eliminate other possibilities of what I saw. So it's not me just really wanting to see a Sasquatch and finally seeing one. I'm running through my mind, did I actually see this thing? Am I just projecting it? I want somebody to kind of grill me and give me the tough questions, to go over the story and kind of get to the bottom of it. I think that's important, frankly. You can't just, even competent people can make mistakes. So I think that's
sure.
that's definitely, it's part of the process for sure. Now we do have a few more good questions here. Chuck Gonzalez asks, do you think it marks its area?
I'm assuming he's asking about like tree breaks and limb twists and
Something, yeah.
stuff like that. I think it's possible. We have found we don't find a lot of that down there where we're working in area we call Area X, which sounds really spooky and creepy, but there's actually a story behind how it got its name. But these big X formations and things like that you see on TV a lot of, we don't see much of that. We have found a few twisted limbs from time to time, but nothing that was just painfully obvious, and you're out in the woods and limbs break and fall down and they get themselves into some weird angles, and it's a lot of times it's hard to tell, what's natural and what's not. And but we haven't seen a lot of that where we are. Now we've got some guys in the group who are really, excellent trackers, and they might be able to address that a little better. But the sign we tend to find is a lot more subtle than that. And so I think it's very possible they do. I think it now what we may just be right in the middle of a territory, so the markers might be around the edges of
Some
whatever the
further
range
out, right?
is, and so we're not seeing them where we are because we plopped ourselves down right in the living room, so to speak, possibly. So again, that's one of those things. I mean, other apes do it, so I don't know why they wouldn't. I do think a lot of these tree formations, limb formation, a lot of them get attributed to these animals that I don't. I think it's overly done a lot.
Yeah,
I think
dubious.
more. I think more is I think they get more credit for that than they really probably deserve. I think a lot of that is probably not ape related,
Right.
but some of it I think probably is. But I think it's. I mean, again, when you find something that's clearly been twisted, you got to have the thumb, to do that. And but a lot of the other kind of stuff, these weird formations and things, I don't really know what to think about them. Again, I'm open minded, but we haven't found these TP structures. We haven't found
Yeah.
these big X's and things like that you hear about. So I just don't know what to think about it. And if we ever find them, we're going to take a good hard look at them, but we haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, Bigfoot on the brain, it's a common affliction for a lot of folks. And, I think you wonder how a lot of this stuff gets started. Somebody finds something that they claim is a structure and that kind of becomes accepted online or on YouTube that is sign of Sasquatch or whatever. How that happens, I mean, it's clearly not a scientific process of establishing that as sort of a thing that just happens. It's kind of taken for granted. So that's why it's always interesting to talk to folks that are in these areas. So I do appreciate the question.
Oh yeah.
Chuck, definitely a great question. So we take two more questions here. One of them is from Tate, and this is kind of something I was going to bring up anyway. He asks, I heard on a podcast from the NAWAC that there was a GPS tracker glued to a burr. It was picked up and carried for months. What are your thoughts on that? So we talked a little bit about that with Matt, and that's obviously something that's pretty fascinating.
Go to our website. It's woodape.org. There's a paper there. It's called the
There'll be a
tag.
link to it in the description, by the way,
There'll be a
guys.
link to it. It's called the Tag 7 paper that details all of that, probably in much finer detail than you care to to read about. But yeah, I mean, again, not to cover ground you covered with Matt, but we bought these nano trackers. They were meant for small reptiles, very small. And we hollowed out these cockleburs, which are, if you're from the South, you know what I'm talking about. They're awful. They're just awful. They just stick to you and
They get on you.
If
Yeah,
you've got
right.
a pet, it's the worst thing ever. They get up on the underside. You get a shaggy dog, or
We get those kinds of things too.
horse's
Yeah,
tail or something. It's awful. But we had a member named Mark McClurkin who's just a genius. He cut one in half, he hollowed it out, and he affixed this little tracker inside of it.
Wow.
And then also, if you're much of a hiker through wooded areas, you know all about, and especially in the summertime, spider webs. You can't go 3 feet without walking through a spider web. They go all across game trails and stuff. And so we paid attention to where weird noises were coming from, to where sign we attributed these animals was coming from, where visuals were coming from, and devised a methods we call them string traps. But the way these trackers turn on, there's a little magnet attached to the back, and so Mark attached these little rings to the magnet, and a piece of industrial black thread was tied to it and then tied around a tree, and then the whole thing was suspended on a separate thread, and it was then covered up with rat trap glue, which is that gooey stuff, like these little pads you get, or the glue traps for mice and stuff. It stays sticky in all kinds of weather for months at a time. And the idea was to get this thing to tag itself, and we hung them up at heights 6.5 to 7 feet high to try to eliminate your common animals.
Right.
And I'm 6'3", I could walk under them and never give them a thought. We had one of those tags was activated. You start to get a signal when it separates from that magnet, and so it was tied to the tree, and so the magnet was detached and fell. The string that the actual device was on, it's tied on one end of the tree, and it's just loosely wrapped around another. And so as the animal walks through, it unwinds around that tree, and it just flows out with it, and then that device, it just attaches that cocklebur and that glue, and something took it, and we were able to track it. It took us a long time to find it. Initially, we didn't find it. The summer it was taken it was kind of toward the end of an operation that year. We didn't find it, and we didn't find it again until we went back in, I believe it was December, and
Wow.
we actually had an antenna with a receiver in an airplane. That was a suggestion we got from a member who joined that was a wildlife biologist from Maine. And so we rigged up a plane. We have several pilots in the group, and
Nice.
we had a ground team, and they were able to kind of fly figure 8 patterns across the general area. And be honest with you, we were not expecting. We thought it probably just malfunctioned or something, but they started the hits. We were able to chart the hits, and then they were able to direct the ground team, and we got in close proximity several times. We believe within 100 yards, because when you've got this antenna, it's directional. It's kind of line of sight deal. So if this thing ducks into a ravine, you lose the signal altogether. But
Right.
so it's got to be pretty close, and you get these bars. You got this graph, where 1 bar it's pretty far away, 2 bars it's a little closer, 4 or 5. I mean, this thing's vibrating, it's buzzing in your hand. It's close. And we got really close several times, but it always just kind of melted back into the forest in these inaccessible, super thick areas. And so we were never able to lay eyes on it. But we tracked this thing for months, and were able to establish enough data points, we believe, to make it's on the low end, but we think there are enough data points there to establish a range. But this thing, miles and miles. I mean, it was a range bigger than a bear. It was comparable to a mountain lion, but according to Oklahoma, there are none up there.
Yeah.
Which that's not true either. But
And based on the suspension, would that have been
but again, it was
suspect?
it was 7 feet in the air. It was and Mark tested these things on all kinds of fur, feathers, just everything to see what it would adhere to.
So smart.
And he tested it on deer hide, which it's not exactly the same, but a mountain lion's kind of got close, tight coat similar to that, and it just didn't adhere very well for very long. So whatever it was, it stayed on for months at a time. We got to the point we were hoping it would shed it, and that we would then be able to just find the tracker, because we figured it had to have hair and DNA evidence on it.
Oh, wow.
But apparently it never detached, and the batteries last about a year.
It just sort of died on. Now, how large was it? If you had to show like the size of the entire
the tag was
contraption?
probably I'm trying to get on my camera here, but it's the tag itself here, but it had kind of a tail, an antenna.
Oh, okay. So like penny-sized, quarter-sized.
I would
something
say
like that?
about it was kind of it's rectangular, a little bigger than a quarter, but not much.
Okay, that's really tiny
So
though.
to find that in the woods, but the thing was, it never stopped. It was on the move the whole time, and after about a year, the battery finally gave out, and we never found it. But part of it, eliminating other animals, is the time of year. December, January, February, we were tracking this thing. Bears are in torpor. They're denned up that time of year. They're not moving. Now, they come out of their den from time to time. It's not a straight snooze all the way through the winter, but they're not moving around like this thing was. It was all over the place, up and down and across valleys, and down one mountain, up another. It was all over. So that tag 7 paper details all that, and we really believe that one of these animals tagged itself. And we didn't realize how lucky we were. We thought, because we really kind of the first set we'd put it out, oh man, this is gonna be easy, we'll duplicate this, and we have not been able to duplicate it yet.
Wow.
We still have the tags, we're still trying, but we have not yet.
And they're not cheap, these little things. I know Matt was saying they're pretty penny.
Yeah, they're not cheap. The receiver, the antennas are the most costly part of the whole deal. But yeah, you're looking at I'm trying to remember. You're approaching 300. I think this may not be exactly right, but between $200 and $300 per nano tag. So yeah, it's not cheap. But the good news is the batteries last a really long time, as long as the magnet is attached. And once that becomes detached, then you got about a year.
Wow. So it would be even if it was attached, you'd get more than a year.
Well, I mean, you're not going to get a signal at all while it's not activated. It's turned off while the magnet is attached to it. That's what.
Oh, right. That's okay. Get you. Yeah.
So it's just sitting on the shelf for all practical purposes until the magnet is detached. And we've had several instances where we felt like something walked through one of those string traps again. The magnet was detached, but for whatever reason, the tag did not adhere. It just, it was either laying on the ground there, or it was still dangling from the string or something, where it just didn't adhere. So we got a little spoiled. I think we had success pretty quick with it, but we've not been able to duplicate it yet. But it's one of the tricks, one of the things that's in our bag that we're trying to throw at this thing to get more evidence.
Awesome. And it's certainly interesting for folks that want to check that out. Definitely go check out the website. It's linked below in the comment, or in the description rather. Go check out the Tag 7 paper. It's super, super interesting. I guarantee you will learn something new at least. And the way that you guys write your stuff, it's very scientific. It's approachable, but I think it's held to a higher, you hold yourselves to a pretty high standard, I'd say, in terms of, just release every little thing that you have happen there.
Well, it's true. And we'll be the first to tell you, we'll be the first to tell you that we don't have anything absolutely definitive. I mean, me telling you what I've seen with my eyes is just another story. Me telling you what I've heard, no, it's interesting. People like to hear the stories, but it's not proof. And so we know that. And but what we're trying to do until we do have that definitive proof is just keep building on that mountain of anecdotal evidence. It just, the way I've put it before is what we're trying to do is get some help. We're trying to get somebody, and we're not begging for money, but I'm talking about like a university, a museum
Mm,
who looks at our stuff and says, okay, you know what? There's something to this. We need to get with these
yeah.
guys and find out what's going on, and let's team up and see if we can get this done. Uh, I like to think of it as like the difference between a jury and a grand jury.
Mm,
You know, we don't have enough evidence to convict, so to speak. It's real, you know. I believe we do have enough evidence if we're thinking like a grand jury. Their job is to look at the evidence. Is there enough here to take a closer look and find
yes.
out
Yeah.
what happened? I think we do have that if somebody would just take a look at it and come in open-minded and be willing to sit down and talk with us about it and go through everything that we've got. I think we do have enough of that evidence that it warrants a closer look to find out what the heck is going on out there. And that's our hope. That's our hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, last question as we start wrapping up here from Donald Fuller asks, was blood taken from the one that got shot for DNA tests?
Yes and no. We, after the initial, he's talking about something we call the Echo incident. I don't know how familiar everybody is with that, but
Give like a brief summary, whatever works
well,
for you.
basically, we had heard some racket, and a couple of guys went to investigate, and they caught one crossing the trail, moving from right to left, and it had its head turned. It was facing the other way, and it turned out there were some visitors coming into the area. We were working on some private land, and some family members were actually coming in, and we couldn't hear them. They were far enough away, but whatever, you know, that seemed to have gotten the attention of the animal and made it decide I want to get up and move. And uh, so we kind of caught it with its pants down, so to speak. You know, it was looking the other way. It was distracted, which is one of the things I think that's a weakness for these things. I don't think they're very good multitaskers. I think they're very
Mm,
focused. And I think if you can get them focused on one thing, you've got a chance to get close from time to time.
mm,
But that's another discussion another day. But
sure.
anyway, shots were fired. The member who took the shots probably picked up the wrong long gun. He picked up a shotgun as opposed to his
Oh,
rifle, and it was loaded with a combination of buck and slugs, which slugs would have done the trick.
right.
But anyway, he emptied, you know, he emptied the thing. It was a Remington semi-auto shotgun, and
5 or 6 rounds, probably.
at least, yeah, it
Yeah.
was. I want to say maybe 7 or 8 actually,
Oh,
but
so it's a little higher capacity. Yeah.
yeah, but just convinced, absolutely convinced that he had dropped it. You know, and you know, smoke hanging in the air, and smoke cleared. Went to approach the spot, which probably in the excitement, maybe not the advisable thing to do. You know, any hunter will tell you, you know, let's wait half an hour. You know, let's. And got there and they couldn't find any blood, and they found evidence of some of the slugs and some trees where they'd not found their target. He's thinking he most likely hit it. I believe the first 2 shells were double-aught buck, which just isn't enough. You know, I think that's probably what he peppered the thing with, and then by that time it kicked into gear, and I don't think he got it with a slug. But they searched the area, and of course it was getting dark. It was that time of day, so they had to wait till the next morning and finding the blood evidence the next day. They just couldn't find any, and uh, they searched the direction that it had fled in and couldn't find any blood evidence. And we were kind of convinced that, okay, it just got peppered. It's going to get as far away from us as it possibly can. So we looked in those directions. It was not for over a week. We had another member in. Again, it's Mark McClurkin, the same guy who came up with the cocklebur idea. he was there, and he took a different route. He was walking a dry creek bed that, and he found some blood on rocks, like blood spatter, like a drip, and somewhat directional. And it seems like the animal doubled back and actually passed in very close proximity to where we were. It was,
Wow.
not what we would have expected, and it went a completely different direction than we thought. And so that's why we didn't find it initially. And by that time, it had been out 100-degree days for over a week. It had degraded, and we did send a sample to a lab in Canada. We got a couple of doctors in the group, and they sprayed. Oh, you're gonna have to help me here. The blue stuff they spray to
Oh man,
to detect blood. You know what I'm talking about. I can't think of the name of the chemical, but
it'll come to me later when it's not needed. You know, always happens like that.
Yeah.
So
But,
yeah, maybe.
Oops, there.
Yeah, I lost you there for
Anyway,
a
he had done
second.
that. Yeah, he confirmed that it was blood through that test, and we sent it to a lab. in
Luminol,
Canada.
is that it?
Luminol. There you go.
Thank you, Phil C.
Thank you very much. And through the luminol test, he confirmed that it was blood. Now, he couldn't tell from what from that test, only that it was blood. Sent it up to the lab up north, and they, according to what they sent us, they could not even confirm that it was blood, which we found shocking and very curious. Because, I mean, this guy who had confirmed, he's no joker. He's a trauma surgeon. I mean, he's the head of the biggest trauma center in the Houston area. I mean, he knows what he's doing, and we thought that was very strange. And so yes, we've collected blood, but that kind of soured us on just we've got a very limited few drops on a few rocks,
Right.
And
it's not like you had a pool of it or flesh or something to deal with.
So we have not, and since then we haven't found anybody particularly interested in looking at it anyway. But we've had some bad luck with that. We had a hair sample we sent. I don't know if you remember when Dr. Brian Sykes was doing the whole Yeti thing, and we sent him a hair sample, and he doesn't know what happened to it. I mean, we don't know. We don't know where it is. We don't know what happened.
Things get lost in labs easily, huh?
Yeah, and I'm not saying it was his fault, but
no, but administration. You never know, stuff gets misplaced.
But it's a mystery as to what. So we're a little on sending stuff off right now.
Oh, for sure.
And it's a no-win, because you can stick this stuff in a box in a closet. It's not doing you any good either.
Just sitting on it.
So, but we think as we compile more, we just want to add to the stack of what we've got, and then one of these days, somebody who's qualified comes in and offers to look and help us out. We'll have all this stuff for them to look at, and hopefully we'll have that relationship where it'll be taken a little better care of than it has in the past. So
yeah.
So that's a long answer to a pretty simple and good question.
No, and I think it's a great answer. Absolutely. And one last question, if you're cool with that. Sure. I know, because Tate, I think he asked this last week of Matt, and Matt said he didn't. I know he knows the Lowes personally, but he asked, and you guys are pretty, in general, which I actually kind of like. You don't do a lot of media appearances. You're pretty selective. I mean, there's been the only two that I can really think of, obviously, would be Seth with On the Trail of Bigfoot, and then the Lowe Files. Now, Tate asks, did Michael work on the Lowe Files? If so, what's his thoughts?
Yeah, I was there. I had mixed feelings about it. There was actually very little chance of success. There was and this was not the fault of the Lowes, for example. This was this was the crew that was there. It was
production,
the production. I mean, this wasn't a small group of folks that were traveling. The Lowes themselves were great. They were amazingly nice, down to earth. They actually stayed out with us. The production people had to quit because they're all union. And
that's right. After they can't work a certain amount of hours. Yeah.
And so after so many hours, they had to pack up and go. And the plan had been to kind of, that's when the whole thing was going to shut down. But they decided to stay with us for 3 or 4 more hours. It was Rob Lowe and his 2 boys, and then I guess he was one of the producers. He stayed with a handheld camera.
Oh, cool.
And they stayed with us well into the wee hours of the night. And we did hear a whoop type vocalization. Now, I was misquoted in it, which kind of annoyed me.
It's
but
TV, right?
But it's TV. But it was overall a good experience. I think I think certainly we appeared for sure less kooky than some of the people that appeared on that show, and hopefully put us in a good light. But it was kind of interesting to see how the sausage is made, so to speak, for some of these shows.
Sure.
And you did learn there's not a whole lot of reality in reality TV sometimes, but they were amazingly nice. I have nothing but good things to say about the Lowes themselves. They were terrific. Very down to earth, like I said. And it was, from that aspect, it was a real pleasure, and we don't do a lot. We did some things in the early days. We did the organization appeared on a show called Weird Travels on the
I remember
Travel
that show,
Network years ago, and we did a couple of Monster Quest episodes when that was on, because we felt like they were doing a pretty good job. But we've turned down a whole lot more than we've accepted. And matter of fact, the whole Lowe File thing, we told them no, I bet you half a dozen times, and they just stayed after us. And they said that, no, you're the group we want to go out with. And so we did. And I think overall it was definitely more positive to it than negative, for sure. What amazed me is that when it was time to eat, we're in the middle of nowhere, and we're all pulling out our MREs and protein bars and stuff like that. All of a sudden, these taco salads appeared out of thin air for Rob and the boys. And I'm like, now that's the trick. That's the magic here. That's the mystery.
Craft services.
Where did those come from? So, but no, it was fun, and it's not the kind of thing want to do a lot of. If we're serious about trying, we lucked into a vocalization we really didn't expect to hear or see anything, and then they did a poor job as far as playing that vocalization on the episode. Here's the most compelling thing we had.
It
was amazing. It blew everybody's mind, and they hardly paid any attention to it at all. So
TV is strange.
So,
it really
TV,
is.
Yeah. So, but
that's a cool experience. I'm glad it was a positive one, because that's the thing. I think you obviously, when it comes to this topic in particular, I think TV for the vast majority has been pretty bad. I mean, there's been a lot of bad depictions of researchers. I mean, there's exceptions, of course. You've got stuff like Finding Bigfoot, which, say what you want about the show. A lot of people have strong feelings, but it really mainstreamed Bigfoot in a lot of ways in different places. And I constantly see that. But you have certain they have certain agendas. They're not really as interested in perhaps the real.
They're in the entertainment industry, and
exactly.
That's what we have to remember. And I think where some of them missed the boat, and I think the closest to hit the mark, probably, as far as the series goes, it probably was Monster Quest. They seem to realize there's an appetite for, the mystery itself is enough. I don't think you have to embellish it or play up personalities. I think that the mystery itself is something people are interested in. I think there's a hunger for that. I mean, as bad as a lot of these shows have been, somebody's watching them because they keep making them.
I know.
And I think there's a hunger for it out there.
Oh, no, for sure. And I think the problem is there used to be a lot more serious programs about these topics. I mean, everyone will talk about In Search Of and all these other Animal X, all these programs, Monster Quest, that really took it seriously. I mean, obviously, if you know somebody like Doug Hychek, he's actually into this aside from doing it for TV. But once they realized, and this is just a general kind of Hollywood media thing, that reality TV is a lot cheaper to produce than other types of documentary filmmaking. It's an easy format. Oh, we don't have to pay for all these samples to get tested and all this stuff. So it's an easy format. So I think, and that's certainly what we see with some of the documentaries we've been doing, whether it's stuff I've been doing independently or the stuff like that Seth did with you guys out there, or like what we're doing now with the Olympic Project, kind of documentary look at them. And we're basically just going and hanging out with them or hanging out with folks in the field with cameras, and we're not sensationalizing it. And there's a huge following. People are thirsting for that kind of stuff.
I think the next thing, if I was going to do it, what I would want to do is I would want to embed myself, my production company, my people with a group like us or the Olympic project guys. They're basically doing the same thing. They're going out and they're staying out and for weeks and weeks at a time. And now whether you looked at that, I don't know if that would make a very good weekly episode kind of deal, but I think you could come up with a really nice 1 or 2 hour special that people would really like. You think along the lines of Legend Meets Science. That was pretty well done. It was a one-off. It was a 2 hour special,
and obviously Doug is working on kind of the continuation.
But you look at the success. Seth, they had Eye Shine up on the mountain down there with us, and then
that's one of the incidents that he kind of his needle of believing to not really switch from that event.
And if the one thing about finding Bigfoot that I get asked all the time is, well, if they're convinced they're in a location where there is one of these things, why do they leave? And it's a great question. It's because
TV,
TV, and so I think the natural next step would be not to.
Right, just stay in the locations.
And stay, and let's see, pick the group that you think is doing the real work, that's the real deal, so to speak, and let's get in there with them, and let's see. I think that's the next thing that I hope comes from this, would be something more along those lines than just another weekly, we're going to hop from this location to that location. And there was a lot of interest in a lot of these locations where these famous historical, the Bluff Creeks, the Ruby Creeks, the Willow Creeks, and
places that have never really had Bigfoot research done in them before.
But get somewhere, and if you really believe it's here, let's stay for the long haul and let's find out. Now, after you go, thing is with this stuff, you go 2-3 weeks sometimes where very little happens, and you can see where I don't know about the patience these folks would have, but
you've got to be into it. I think
I think so.
If TV and now everything's going to streaming and digital platforms, if they're not going to produce this stuff, people will do that. I mean, and Seth is doing a similar thing with this property they have in Minerva, Ohio, with the Minerva monster case and the Bigfoot project. And I'm actually going out there later this week, and we'll spend some time out there. And they've had a lot of weird stuff going on there. And there's that repeated long history, but that's one of those things, when you're talking about a group like yourselves or some of the other research groups that are really embedded to stay in an area.
There are other groups besides us that are doing good work. I think, but I think that's the logical evolution of things is give yourself a real chance of success. I compare it to like these guys who got the snow leopard footage a few years back.
It's like
they're hanging on the side of a mountain for I think 3 months to get 3-4 months continuously 24/7 scanning this ravine, this mountainside opposite this big ravine, to get, I think they got 7 minutes of footage or something like that in 4 months. But that's the kind of stick-to-itiveness that I think it's going to take. If someone really wants a chance of getting footage of these things, and I think the chance of getting thermal footage is extremely
I completely agree. I think that's the best venue to look at, especially as thermals get cheaper. They're going to be more accessible. I mean, think about drones. Almost anyone can buy a drone now. 6 years ago, that wasn't the case. You'd have to shell a lot of money. Thermals are getting more and more accessible, and I really do think that's an area that I'm trying to focus in on is do the thermal stuff, because I think that's extremely promising. We've already got a good body of very decent thermal footage that's out there that hasn't been debunked or
And that's one thing
explained away.
we're going to try to do a little more this summer's have some landmarks of known heights and widths
Yeah.
and things like that are out there, so that if something, because there's not a lot of detail on a thermal. They're better than they used to be. Some of them are downright amazing these days, but
Oh yeah.
but to see this kind of hot spot, roughly humanoid shape and all that stuff. Well, that could be anybody out there. Well, if it's standing next to this landmark that we've marked, we know this marker. This is 7 feet high, uh, and this thing is 3 or 4 inches above that, or even an inch or two below it. There are not many. It helps. It's going to help, and I think there's a real good chance of success with that. But again, I think that's the evolution of the I think there's a hunger for the real. People want to see what's really going on, what it's really like to be out looking for these things. And why has no one found one? Well, because no one's really looking.
Well, right. I mean, you need money.
Because it's hard.
Money and resources. Who's dishing out money to say, go hang out in the woods for a month and try and get,
it's hard. It's expensive. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's hostile environments. It's 99% boredom, 1% terror. I mean, that's what it, comes down to sometimes. And there just aren't many people willing to do it. And
No,
that's why. That's why, and the people who do go, they go out for a long weekend and then they go home. And maybe it's next Labor Day. Yeah. It's next Labor Day before they get to go again, and it's just nobody essentially statistically really is looking. And
right. And there may be thousands of people that are squatchers or going out and doing these things, but again, most people have a life outside of it. This is mostly a hobby for people. Right. There aren't a research organization says, or a grant, you get a grant. Here's $10 million, go find this thing, and what you mentioned about the snow leopard was interesting. Always look at those examples of what wildlife photographers do, but then also maybe combining it with what they did with primate research, going out there like the Jane Goodalls and the Diane Fosseys. I think it's all something that should be looked at. And I think Matt actually mentioned this on the show last week. He said that is, and I've heard Cliff also talk about this a lot, which I think spot on. Discovery is almost a process. It's not, maybe it's with this thing, it doesn't seem like it's going to be that one thing. It's almost, there's a process, there's different things that happen, there's pieces that get placed together. So if you're looking at the one little individual piece, it may not look like much, but when you zoom out and see the body of evidence or things, maybe that is something, part of the process, part of the puzzle. I don't know. I think it's certainly an interesting way to look at it.
I agree.
Well, it's been so fascinating. Thank you so much for almost 2.5 hours of your time tonight.
It's been a pleasure. I thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Anytime.
Thank you, Peggy, for that super chat. And we have a lot of great comments. Kevin Hamilton says, have a good night. Papa Craig says, excellent show, Alex and Michael, very informative. Donald Fuller, New Hampshire Sasquatch. Michael is a great wealth of knowledge. It was a pleasure hearing him speak. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone, and God bless. And actually, Papa Craig makes a good comment. He says it really helps to stay out long if you have another thing you're doing, hunting, fishing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Find a hobby.
Absolutely.
Don't just be out there, twiddling your thumbs all day long. That's good advice, for sure. Well, awesome. I've linked your website down below as well as the NAWAC website. Is there anything else or anywhere else you'd like people to kind of look out for some of the stuff you do or some of the stuff you work on?
Oh, anybody's interested in the shameless plug here for in the book on the Black Panther phenomenon. It's called Shadow Cats, Black Panthers of North America, and you can just punch up my name or that title on Amazon or anywhere they sell books. I certainly would appreciate it. I got a girl in college right now and I'm trying to get her through, so every little bit helps. But if you're interested in that topic, that to my knowledge, it's the only full-length book on the topic. Yeah. There have been chapters in other books, about various cryptids, kind of collections. Right. But to my knowledge, it's the only full-length book dedicated solely to that topic. So if you're interested in that, that's available. But again, woodape.org, that's the NAWAC's website, and there's lots of good stuff out there. Check the sighting report database, the Tag 7 paper. There's something called the
Hadrian's Wall. I know you guys worked on
the camera trapping project we've got going. the Ouachita Project monograph, which is a wealth of information, historical
Absolutely.
and contemporary. Just all kinds of good stuff out there, and we'd love to have you come and visit. And
Be awesome.
and there's a place there. You got a question or a suggestion, send it. We're open.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone in the chat, for your awesome questions and comments. As always, love seeing you guys asking questions and talking about your experiences, relating it to what the guests talk about. It's just such a cool part. It's one of the big reasons why I do this, just being able to interact with the audiences and seeing what people have to say. So thank you guys. As I mentioned, this Wednesday, another awesome conversation with Gareth Patterson. I think it's going to blow people's minds because we talk about Bigfoot in North America a lot. And
He's great. He's amazing.
The South African stuff. Yeah. I was born there, so for me, it's a special place for me. So it's a crazy conversation. It does start out with cats again, but it's all about the otang and that stuff down there. So that, and then next week, as Carrick here is saying, wonderful show as always. Good night. He will be hosting next week's show, so be sure to tune in. I don't know what topic he's going to talk about, but Carrick's awesome. So for those folks going to Crypticon, hope to see you there. Let's come hang out, and I'll do a stream. And everyone have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you guys in a few weeks then.